Number 20. James Wan. Probably the flashiest and most stereotypically commercial director on this list. It's hard to deny his talent for making things scary. His polished style, rather than being too clean, actually works to effectively build his films around their scares. His funhouse visual style is very appropriate, as his movies are sort of like a gallery of effective horror set pieces. I'm not a big fan of Saw, but his haunted house films, Insidious and The Conjuring, are a great modernized retread of an oldest-time concept. And Malignant, my favorite of his, is a perfect high-budget reimagining of trashy, low-budget horror classics from the 70s and 80s. Number 19. Ti West. Another director with obvious throwback tendencies, Ti West still manages to make films that are all his own. He's very good at implementing the aesthetics of various periods or genres in order to achieve a specific effect, with House of the Devil being a great example of that. Its pre-satanic panic, lo-fi visuals and creepy, deliberate pacing contributing to an end product that is more than the sum of its parts. X does the same, being another 70s throwback, this one playing off of our anxieties regarding aging. His magnus opus, Pearl, sets its aesthetic sights even further in the past, grounding its horror in a more naive age, with more naive wish fulfillment. And its anti-hero, cruelly finding out what we already know about the nature and unlikelihood of fame and fortune, becomes like an avenging angel or demon, fueled by her own disappointment. Number 18. Jordan Peele. Known for his exploration of race and racial conflict in film, Peele has been unfairly typecast in the minds of many. Interestingly, it's only his first film, Get Out, which deals directly with race, and does so in a way that's rather unique, far from the cliches that most writers and directors would dabble in. What would be more accurate to say is that Peele deals with broad social issues, successfully whittling them down to clever allegories. Get Out is a perfect example of this. Us, an allegory on class and John Rawls' veil of ignorance, while being more visually and symbolically ambitious, overextends itself a little bit here, but it's still great. Nope is also the victim of mixed reception, but I honestly think it's his best work. Filmmaking wise, it shows his increasing grasp of camera work, and the writing, while to some is as strained as us, I actually think this is his most well realized metaphor, with the themes of the spectacle of entertainment and the place animals occupy there since as far back as the Roman Circus Maximus and beyond, being shown beautifully here. The fact that it also borrows the structure of Jaws, another classic of animal horror, shows how clever Jordan Peele can be when he's firing on all cylinders. Number 17. Larry Cohen. Another director on the list who's as good at screenwriting as he is at directing. Cohen's films are filled with unsubtle social commentary, but unlike the previous three directors who feel comfortable tying themselves to strict genre conventions, Larry Cohen shows no shyness breaking away. His movies are always cheaper than they should be given their ambition, yet they never feel unfulfilled. The cheapness is often part of the charm, and even feeds into the social commentary itself. His open-minded, freewheeling style of filmmaking adds an enjoyable chaos, with many of his actors given free rein, a la John Cassavetes, to form their characters through ad-lib dialogue and on-the-spot characterization. It's Alive, God Told Me To, and The Stuff are all great examples of his creativity and style, but his best work, in my opinion, can be seen in his classic, Q the Winged Serpent. The surreal sight of Michael Moriarty and David Carradine chewing scenery while a stop-motion, poorly keyed in abomination from Mexican folklore glides through the New York skyline. Well, it's a sight to behold. Number 16. George A. Romero. Romero didn't invent the zombie. What he did was invent the zombie as we currently imagine them. Not so much as a sign of witchcraft or superstition, the fear of losing control to forces outside oneself, but now the symbol of infection, the symbol of mindlessness, the symbol of societal decay or collapse. This is part of the reason why when the zombies themselves are removed from his films and instead replaced by simple outbreaks of feral violence, like in the case of The Crazies, the movie still works so well. The villains in Romero's films, as cliche as it is to say, is mankind itself. How we respond to crisis, how we adapt and try to save ourselves, those we hurt in the need to do so, those we hurt in our attempt to help them. It's not only Romero's exploration of this that makes him so unique, but the way in which he does it, while making any and all preferable choices equally suspect. The good guys in his films are good because they're purer of heart and motive, but not purer of consequence. It's often the selfish curmudgeons who are proven correct in especially cruel twists of fate. The collapses he explores don't come from a singular bad decision, but the bad decisions which come from a collapse in the knowledge and infrastructure which gave us such security in the past. Night of the Living Dead, The Crazies, and Day of the Dead explore this all exceptionally well, but I think it's Dawn of the Dead which does it with the most fun, color, and joy for filmmaking. Number 15. Stuart Gordon. Being known for being the Lovecraft guy is already a great legacy. But, and I think this is to Gordon's credit, he's only superficially the Lovecraft guy, in that most of his movies are in name and concept Lovecraft adaptations. Spiritually, Stuart Gordon often skirts a tone that is in deep contradiction to Lovecraft's, often utilizing humor and cheesy shock value to great effect. Reanimator is a tonally perfect film, with its central performance by Jeffrey Combs only adding to its manic energy. From Beyond, its source being one of Lovecraft's shorter works, expands on its concept with a 90-minute-long depraved special effects spectacle. Beyond this though, even Gordon's less regarded works, like Dolls, which was a fairy tale-esque precursor to Child's Play, hits a perfect tonal balance. Number 14. Lucio Fulci. Like many Italian greats, Fulci favors visuals and creative set pieces over story or character. The atmosphere of his films are successfully dreamlike because of this. Beyond just the gore, it's the sense that anything can happen, that the filter between our world and the world of spirits is so thin at some points that they become one. The Beyond is his obvious classic, as well as City of the Dead, but my favorite and perhaps his best told story is Don't Torture a Duckling. Number 13. Ari Aster. Aster's films are masterpieces in upsetting their audience, but more than that, they're explorations of the concept of upset itself. Hereditary deals with the upsetting consequences of decisions made by knowing parties behind the scenes. There's an extra level of cruelty in that the victims of these clandestine plans go the bulk of the movie without understanding their place in it all, their whole lives technically being an extension of these larger plans and pre-configurations. It's one of the best examples I've seen of a genuinely good movie leaving a bad taste in your mouth. The movie isn't just about evil, but actually feels evil itself. Likewise, Midsommar does something similar, this time using an upsetting trauma as catalyst to explore the idea of rituals and community, and the part these traditional, even traditional to the point of being backwards, ways of living play in giving people some degree of stability and warmth. Number 12. Roger Corman. Corman, beyond just being a legendary producer and the catalyst for many a great director's career, was also a legendary director himself. Corman has two types of classic horror film. The first are his high-concept horror comedies, such as The Little Shop of Horrors and Buckets of Blood, but he's probably more famous for his Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, which, despite their low-budget nature and staginess, still contain a notable level of class. The best of them, and the one which builds quite a bit off its rather brief source material, is The Mask of the Red Death. Here you can see their typical elements, their garish color palette, and the legendary character acting by Vincent Price on full display. Number 11. Sam Raimi. Raimi has moved on to bigger and, quote, better things, but even in his later, more mainstream work, you can still see the echoes of his earlier independent horror film background. Evil Dead, with its innovative camera work and magic show influenced special effects, not only works as a veritable funhouse of a film, but it also contains an innovative villain, one seeming to be equally inspired by The Exorcist and Romero's zombie film. The manic energy of the first film is turned up even higher for its sequel, making it quite possibly the greatest horror comedy of all time. Drag Me to Hell, made much later, is a retread to these masterpieces of energy and excess that Raimi is known for, a style which he, hopefully, will be soon to try out again. Number 10. Wes Craven. Wes Craven has covered a lot of ground in his career, from family dramas involving escaped psychopaths, to family dramas involving isolationist mutants, from killers who attack you using the cloak of your own dreams, to killers who attack you using the cloak of your own entertainment or pop culture. What makes Craven different from many of his peers is his erudite understanding of folklore and philosophy. Some of his films, like Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, address tribalism and the natural war which exists between competing in-groups. Others, like A Nightmare on Elm Street, address intergenerational guilt and the hidden mark left by past sins. And, later in his career, with films like New Nightmare and the Scream series, he even explores the nature of storytelling itself, the way we exercise our sins through our stories, or the way these stories affect our perception of our present. While not known for any specific style or tone as a director, his movies have a sinister undercurrent, one which feels very specific, and which sticks out even within a genre known for its sinister undercurrents. Number 9. Mike Flanagan. Flanagan, like James Wan, directs like a well-oiled machine. His movies and miniseries have an almost Spielbergian sentimentality to them, which can sometimes be great, but other times be a little much. But with this sentimentality also comes a great focus on character, which when combined with his fantastical, almost comic booky plots, makes for extremely engaging storytelling. The Haunting of Hill House, which draws only loosely from its source material, is a perfect example of this style, with its cross-cutting between time and space, editing with the scares in mind, leaving the viewer with no safe place for shelter. A fact which is in keeping with the themes and plot of the show. Midnight Mass, while less scary, is even more clever with its plot and the way it explores themes such as religion, faith, and mortality. His best work to date, though, might be his sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep, which exemplifies his talent for combining the paranormal with great character development and conflict. Number 8. Jacques Tourneur. A master of mood and atmosphere, Turner's films run with a very strange energy, even to this day. Cat People is his most famous film, and its undercurrent of repressed sexuality and instinct manifests itself starkly against its minimalistic plot and set design. The film is quiet enough that the mere clicking of high heels, eerie enough on their own, feels like a victim when drowned out by the sound of a squealing bus. I Walked with a Zombie, with its night filled with otherworldly chanting amongst nature's echoes, again captures something as mysterious as the darkness itself. It's a film conjured purely out of elements alone. Night of the Demon trades in this visceral elementality for an exploration of superstition and its clash with rationality, but still loses none of Turner's magic. Number 7. Tobe Hooper. Hooper is disproportionately known for one film, and to some extent, this is understandable. After all, that one film is arguably the greatest horror film of all time, one unique in its intensity and influence. But this characterization of Hooper as a one-film wonder is unfair. Beyond Poltergeist, where there's some doubt as to how much of it he actually directed, Life Force is a perfect end-of-the-world film, one which tackles the usual vampire lore from the perspective of science fiction. Hooper's talent for world building and his attention to detail here show through just as well as they do in his most known work, and Funhouse, despite its small scale, somehow manages to feel equally apocalyptic. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is definitely his best film. Even that one alone would secure his place on this list, as it's one of the best directed films of all time, and in some ways it's the transition piece between the horror of old and what was to come afterwards. Number 6. Robert Eggers. Eggers, on top of being a great director, is also one of the more interesting screenwriters working today. Focusing on period-accurate detail in terms of plot and dialogue, his films wear the anxiety of the ages they represent perfectly. The Witch, a surprise masterpiece, one which seems to be continually growing in reputation as the years pass, puts us in the mentality of a much more superstitious age. Rather than scoffing at the narrow-mindedness of its characters, it entertains their perspective and, in doing so, introduces us to a very specific, and possibly long-dead, form of fear. Likewise, The Lighthouse, taking place in an age where true isolation, being separated from the world by large stretches of time and space, was possible. Even his historical drama, The Northman, while not a horror film per se, still dips its toe into the horrors of mankind's past, and the mythology which served as its basis. Number 5. James Whale. The first great director on this list chronologically, and still, somehow, as relevant to our current age as all the others. Beyond just introducing the world to the most famous version of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein monster, he's also the origin of much of the language of horror filmmaking, with movies like The Old Dark House establishing a precedent for atmosphere and dread. The Invisible Man, bringing Claude Rains into the world of film, is as influential a portrayal of the mad scientist archetype as that seen in Frankenstein. And The Bride of Frankenstein, having perhaps the most sinister mad scientist of all, also had the most humanistic portrayal of a monster ever put on film. Number 4. Dario Argento. Perhaps the best director on this list visually, Argento pushed not just horror but film in general to its most aesthetic extremes, doing so only partially in the service of storytelling. Like many great artists in Italian cinema, coherence and the forward thrust of plot comes a distant second with him, with his movies largely built around their set pieces, the best of which are crafted to perfection. Movies like Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Deep Red and Tenebrae may feel implausible in their plot conveniences and logistics, but they wear the style of well-crafted murder mystery so well that no one would or should really know the difference. Films like Phenomenon and perhaps his best film, Suspiria, capture both the whimsy and darkness of a fairy tale, doing so much better than almost anyone else. Number 3. Mario Bava. Like Argento and Fulci, plot comes second here as well, but when it comes to style, Bava not only excels but innovates, with the entire giallo genre coming from two of his most famous films, The Girl Who Knew Too Much and Blood and Black Lace. Both these movies drip with style, a style which carries even into his later films. The artificiality of his aesthetics often serves the tone and themes of his movies, which tend to involve cynical characters, backstabbers, and agents of intrigue, who come to ends befitting their conniving dispositions. Beyond just these murder mysteries, his films involving supernatural disturbances, whether it be that of witches, ghosts, or ghouls, contain as much staying power. Black Sunday is probably the best of these, with Rabid, a film released long after his death, being the best representation of how his movies tended to portray the cynicism of human nature. Number 2. David Cronenberg. The king of body horror, Cronenberg's films, despite being quite literally about the gut, are some of the most cerebral horror films ever made. Whether they, like in the case of Shivers, Rabid, or Crash, question the purity of human sexuality, or, like in The Fly, address our fear of aging, disease, and bodily changes, Cronenberg's films are masterpieces in making us fear our own bodies. And perhaps the most important part of our body, our brains, aren't separated from this shrewd analysis, with many of Cronenberg's films dipping into the surreal to cover what happens to consciousness itself when that, our most important organ, is affected by anomaly. Number 1. John Carpenter. Number 1 on this list is probably no surprise to anyone. Known for his style, which is so iconic it's been a major influence on directors even outside of the horror genre, Carpenter fills a frame like no other. Known for his examination of not just a horrifying threat, but the otherness that threat is often representative of, Carpenter's films have birthed some of the most iconic villains in horror movie history, many of whom have become iconic exactly because of their lack of personality, something which makes them alien by their very nature, as if they fill out the psychological archetype of the malicious outsider, the one hardwired into into our minds by either divinely ordained category or by evolution. On top of being the greatest horror director, he's equally as influential to the art of horror score composition, as his lo-fi, minimalistic synth productions imply more than the sum of their parts would suggest. This list was hard for me to order, but there was no doubt from the beginning who'd take the number one spot.